Today on Homeworthy, we're stepping inside the Atlanta home of interior designer Kristin Kong. Her space feels like a living gallery, with each room layered in luxurious wallpapers, sumptuous fabrics, and artful vignettes that tell a story all their own. With a degree in art history, it's no wonder she has amassed an extraordinary collection. Intricate paintings on silk, works from renowned Ukrainian artists, striking African jewelry, and one-of-a-kind flea market finds. For Kristin, collecting is instinctual. She buys what catches her eye, trusting it will all harmonize into one large, ever-evolving masterpiece. Her home is a study in contrast, seamlessly blending contemporary lines, mid-century touches, and treasured antiques, creating a feast for the eyes at every turn. A big thank you to Graza for sponsoring today's Homeworthy episode. I like to cook simple foods that are easy to make but still pack a punch when it comes to flavor. So in our house, we use Graza olive oil, in my opinion, the best. It's high quality, made from 100% olives without any chemicals or funny business. Whether I'm drizzling it on a salad or using it to sear fish, I know that it's full of healthy fats and good for my heart and skin. And now the same high quality oil you know and love is in a beautifully designed glass bottle. Graza's glass bottles also have a clever pop-up spout for an easy mess-free pour. It's a great option if you love the look and feel of glass bottles in your kitchen. It's stylish, delicious, and totally worthy of your home. So head to the link in our description box below and use code HOMEWORTHY10 for 10% off your order. You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi Homeworthy, I'm Kristin Kong. Welcome to my home in Atlanta. Come on in. Hi, I'm Kristin Kong. I'm the owner of K Kong Designs. I'm an interior designer, and you are visiting my house here in Atlanta, Georgia. So the way that we came about living in this home, we've been here, it will be 10 years in December. This actually was my husband's childhood home property. We demolished the existing home. It was a split level that was built in '79. We looked to renovate it, but split levels are hard because there's no big one foundation. So we found that it was, just for how we needed the house to function, we needed to actually tear it down and start over. But it's kind of fun because my husband, he's been in this neighborhood pretty much his whole life. My in-laws, who were living in the house when we bought it from them, they still live with us. My husband is Korean, and that's just sort of part of his culture. So we had to build a house that was, multi-generational, so they have their own entrance and apartment in the basement. And then we kind of kept it as more of like a ranch style for our living needs up top. So one thing that really we loved about this area is it feels, we're kind of actually outside of Atlanta proper. We're sort of northeast of the city. And it feels very much like a small town. So the city of Peachtree Corners was just established probably about 15 years ago. And, it's really great to live in a place where, like, our son, he was able to walk to elementary school. He rode his bike to middle school. He's only like 2 miles from his high school now. And so having that sort of small town feel right near a big city was really, attractive to us to sort of try to stay in this neighborhood. And the schools are good in this area, so that obviously was a big consideration as well. We also liked that the neighborhood wasn't like a new construction neighborhood, so we have old growth trees, and the neighborhood being originally built in the late 70s, you still have some homes with character, and then you also have just really nice, lush, landscape around. So here we are in my home's entry. I think I might have mentioned this before, but one of the struggles when designing the house was that the property is really deep and not wide. So I knew that getting into the house and, putting rooms on either side, my husband's office and the dining room, that I really needed to, I was going to have this really long entry, but I didn't want it to feel like cavernous or, you know, like a dark kind of hidden entry. So one thing that we did was, you know, we custom designed the front door, and we actually have a transom window in it. We wanted privacy, so we did it high enough where no one can really see in it, but it really does allow a lot of light into the entry. The other thing was making sure that we sort of opened up the space with some access points to the adjacent rooms. To this side, we have the dining room, and what I wanted to do there is a design feature that I kind of came up with for the house. It was basically, the inception of it was the kitchen cabinets. I came up with sort of a detail, and I wanted to carry that throughout the space. So what I did was I actually did all of our cased openings the same shape as that detail on the cabinetry. And so when you come into the dining room area, we have these shaped cased openings, and I thought that was kind of important. But I still wanted sort of this landing spot when you walked in. So this is sort of this big case piece. We were able, the entry is 16 feet long, but we were able to go ahead and get a really nice space. This is great storage. I keep a lot of entertaining supplies in here for my dining room. But again, it was another way that I could showcase some of my collections. I love these glass domes, that the cloches that we have, different rocks that I've come across through antique stores, or even just going to High Point shows and stuff. So this is sort of a lot of my natural materials, and you know, you just can't beat Mother Nature with what she produces. So we have a lot of petrified wood, some stones, and then, you know, I sort of different objects. I loved these, they're supposed to be like weapons, I guess, or tools, farming tools. So I had those displayed. This is something else I picked up, my headless horse. But again, I love the textures of wood and the natural materials, the petrified wood, and just kind of showcasing that. I also, I think mentioned before, is that I really do like a lot of the ethnic prints, the Cuba cloth. You'll see a lot of those motifs in the house. And then the lamp that I have, this is actually very mid-century, but I think that for me, it's all about sort of finding a motif and kind of carrying it through subtly. So this sort of had the same, like the shapes of the wood, even though it's very mid-century, it felt in line with the design on the Cuba cloth. Again, when we entered, I was also trying to think about like the wow factor. So I mentioned I love wallpaper. I actually had used this wallpaper for a client first, and I really fell in love with it. So I ended up buying it for myself. So I wanted something that, because you'll see as we walk through the home, some of the spaces are darker, but I wanted this to be light. So it is a very like neutral ground, and it has the accents of gold, which I think pick up nicely on the rug. My husband and I went on an anniversary trip to Turkey, and I told him, I said, just don't get alarmed, but I'm going to buy some rugs while we're here. So I found this one. It was a great length for the really long hallway, and it had some of the golds, and then it has a little bit of a bluish green that then you'll see sort of picked up in the dining room area. But again, for me, it's, you know, a lot of like these subtle motifs and kind of carrying them through the space. The other thing is this visual comfort light. They do a great job. This is one of Kelly Wursler's. She's sort of my design crush, so I have some of her stuff in the house. But you know, I wanted something that was very dramatic. So I wanted you to come in and sort of have a wow factor, but it is sort of more of a pass-through space. But I still use every opportunity I have to display the stuff that I love. So now I'm going to take you into the dining room, which is definitely a little bit of a departure from the entry, but let's go see what it looks like. So here we are in the dining room. This room definitely did have a jumping off point. There were kind of two things that helped inform the design decisions that I was making. The first is when we were on our anniversary trip and we went to Turkey, I found this great fabric and I really wanted to use it. So I kind of knew that I was looking for a green palette in the dining room. And then the second big thing was there's basically an art company that I sourced from, and they will take art pieces and make them into wall murals. And so again, I think I've mentioned I love wallpaper, but I really love the idea of taking a painting that was very attractive to me and turning it into the wallpaper. So we actually have 4 separate murals, and we mirrored the opposite walls, and then we sort of reverse hung it. So something that gives you, I think, is it really feels like it's sort of it envelops you and it's flowing around you, and it's just this really great like cacophony of colors of greens and golds, and I just really love how it moves like around the room. So that was sort of two of the points that I guess my building blocks of the room. And then again, I love art. I mean, my first degree is in art history, so I've collected a lot of pieces. There's a local gallery that I use, and so I've definitely sort of collected different things. I have paintings that are done on plexi. I have paintings that are done on silk. I have all different, little watercolors and things. So I really wanted this space to feel interesting. And then again, sort of displaying collections. I've in our travels and such, I've found things. I just recently, for the first time, went to the Paris flea market when they had Deco off last year, and I found this great. He's a rooster, I think, but he was just really fun. This is actually a Ukrainian artist that makes these, and they also did a little ram, so I had to get those. When I was in London, I found these little bowls that I really liked. Again, all the colors just sort of coming together, and then just the dragon. I don't know, there's some of it is, I come across even at, there's this store in Atlanta called My Favorite Place. It literally is called My Favorite Place, and it's like a glorified flea market, and so I always find really fun pieces there. Again, I have another, mid-century, a nod to the mid-century, this lamp that I've had for a long time. But I just think it works here with the warm wood tones. I really do like balancing warmth and, some of the cooler colors. Another big thing is my father, who's been deceased a long time, studied in Mexico for a little bit, and he actually had these wall hangings. And so I actually had the opportunity to go to Mexico City not long ago, and I found an art piece that sort of spoke to the pieces that I already had from him, and so I bought that, and sort of, it's a nice little homage, I guess, to him over here, and I think about him every day as I walk through my dining room. And then, of course, the table has a lot on it, but it's, we have a collection of everything that sort of, catches my fancy. I mean, I love woven baskets and painted plates and pottery. So a lot of the pottery was from, I did a buying trip to Round Top in Texas. And so I brought a lot of those pieces back. Same with the baskets. I did get some of these in Texas. These were just, wood elements that I got at another supplier out of High Point. So I just sort of collect things that catch my eye. And then I always say to people, like, there's, when you put it all together, it really becomes sort of a statement piece. It becomes sort of an art piece that's in the space. So I think that that's nice to have. Again, here's, some of the art piece, and I paired it. These are little contemporary prints that I got in the Paris flea market, and I think, framing them like that gave them like a patina and an antique feel, even though they're a little bit more contemporary. And then I put them over some Italian, wall shelves that I had gotten at an antique store. So I really do love kind of the interplay of everything. We have a very like modern light fixture in here. The table is more modern. And then I've done all these sort of different chairs, looking for the thing with the fabrics in, from Turkey is they're actually only like 14 inches wide. So I did spend some time trying to source these, and I got these chairs at Scott's Antique Market. But, I needed one that had a back that, we were going to be able to use the fabric. And then these I also got at Scott's and just painted them gold. And these guys are kind of a funny story, though, because these were... somebody was selling these, and they were in that great sort of pea green velvet, from like the 60s. And they weren't really dining chairs, so they're a little bit of a beast. I did have them built up, and we put casters on them so you can sort of roll in and out, but sort of like a throne. And they're definitely not the easiest to get in and out of. So even designers have things that were like, oh, well, maybe that wasn't the best decision. I probably should have actually stuck to a real dining chair. But I like the look of them, and I thought they could sort of completed the dining room. This is one of my favorite artists. I have a lot of this artist's work in my house. It's Connie, and I got it from Delju Art Group here in Atlanta. This one is interesting because it's actually painting that's done on silk. So the way that I love that the way that the ink bleeds into the fabric, and you can even see like when the fabric's mounted to the board, you know, you get really nice texture and ripples from the silk. Then this piece, so my dad's pieces that I had, I was at my favorite place, my little antique store, and they just had this for sale, and honestly, it was like $10. And it was framed, and you know, the frame actually, it has a fabric mat, or you know, like a mounting board, and it has water damage, but I honestly really loved just sort of like the water damage because it added this movement, which I thought felt really right for the wall, especially in this room with this wallpaper. So, and again, just sort of have the nod to the pieces from my father. I thought that was really interesting. Then we have one piece over here, and this again is from Del Jus art group, but this is Craig Allen, and I have several of his pieces as well. So I am a big sort of art collector. I do tend to lean more towards modern abstract prints. I love a lot of figurative work. Connie does a lot of figurative work, and you'll see that in the spaces. And the final piece that I have sort of mounted on the console table, you know, we just have it on a stand. This is actually an artist that I found on Etsy. I do think that Etsy has some really great artists. It's a great opportunity to sort of people who are starting out, and a lot of times you can get prints and it's affordable. And you know, you just take it to a framing shop and do a nice frame on it, and it really elevates it. But you know, it just had all the right colors for the space, and so you know, I like putting art on walls, on stands, and bookcases, and I think there's a lot of way that you can kind of incorporate art into your space. It doesn't necessarily have to be hanging on the wall. So when I'm out shopping, a lot of times, I mean, most of the time I'm shopping for clients, and I might be looking for something more specific, like maybe it's something for the coffee table, or you know, some shelves that we have, or sort of a statement piece. But in general, most of the things that I've sort of have collected in my house are just things that spoke to me, and that's what I always tell my clients. I'm a big fan of, you know, if you love that piece, it's going to work in your home, because as you can see, like this has sort of become this collection, and none of this was bought together. None of it actually even was, you know, intended. You know, I didn't even necessarily know where I was going to put it in the house. But because those pieces were all really interesting to me, whether it was the glaze on the pottery, or the shape of the pottery, or the texture, you know, the wood, the cuts and mars in the wood that you can see, all of that, you know, they work together, because I think it's all stuff that sort of spoke to me on a aesthetic level. And so you know, I always tell people, like, if you see something that really speaks to you, buy it. We'll find a place for it in your home. Because it's really important to love all the pieces that you have. Another thing, you know, when I'm working on clients' homes, is I really always stress the importance of drapery. There's just something about having, like, you know, floor to ceiling fabric. And for me, I know a lot of times people like shutters, but I really want to get all the light in, and I feel like shutters are really limiting. And so I'm a huge fan of actually drapery panels. And you know, in this, yeah, and there's ways to do it where we kept this, you know, this is a pretty reasonable fabric, and I just added like a trim detail to it, which just sort of elevates it, but it ties the whole room together, and it really completes the space. I also think, of course, it also helps like for noise, yeah, because you have some softness next to a hard surface, which is the window. And then the only other thing I think we haven't seen is, you know, again, I have a lot of sort of ethnic things, and I loved this drum. And so I just sort of stuck it here in the corner. It's, you know, it's just a random drum, but, you know, it's just the pattern on it, the wood, the texture, the skin. It's, you know, it's just was something of interest to me, and I love seeing it in this space. I think it kind of helps complete that corner, because this sort of is an access way in, and so I didn't really want to put a furniture piece. I felt like that might impede the flow of traffic, but just having something that sort of finished that corner was really important. So one thing about the layout of this house is our lot is very deep but not wide. So when I was designing the home, because I did all of the drawings for it, it was, you know, how to get in the house, and it was a 16-foot entry lengthwise, but how do you make that so it doesn't feel kind of intimidating? So, you know, right when you walk in, it opens up to my husband's office on the right, and then I did 2 cased openings into our dining room on the left. That way I was allowed to have able to put a piece of furniture there so it still felt like an entry. And then you sort of have a direct view into our kitchen and living area. So it is kind of an open floor plan. I mean, we entertain, we have friends over, we're big football fans. And so having like the kitchen open up directly to the living room, it's really allowed us to, when we entertain, that we actually get people to sit in the living room instead of staying in the kitchen. And then kind of off the back of the dining room, we have the mudroom when you come in from the garage, and then it's kind of our back hallway, which is more of a private area. So we have a guest room, my son's room, our primary suite. We also have a powder room that's off the living room, and then our stairs to go to our basement level. It's in a hidden door in the living room. So I wanted it to feel like a self-contained home on this one living level, but we also obviously needed access to the downstairs, because the downstairs, as I mentioned, is my in-laws suite, a bonus room, my office, another guest room. But really the main living area of our house is the first floor. All right, let's go take a look at the kitchen. It's this way. So here we are in the kitchen, and I think I mentioned before, the real sort of design motif moment came from the design of the kitchen cabinets. So I came up with this extra little detail, the shape detail, just to add some interest to your typical shaker style door. The other thing, I guess, that's a departure for, this house will be 10 years old in December, and I think at that time everyone was doing white kitchens, and I really wanted something more bold and a little more dramatic. So I went with a darker color. This is Black Fox from Sherwin-Williams. But I think, just doing the design and then sort of mimicking that with the cased openings, it was like a really successful design feature, but that was sort of the jumping off point. And then you'll see the same shape in a lot of things, even in some furniture pieces that I have throughout the house. So the most important thing for us was, having a kitchen that was big enough to sort of support just our daily life, our entertaining style. I designed a 10-foot island, and I wanted to get, one solid piece of stone. So this is actually granite. Again, another design story is that literally right before that they were going to be fabricating my countertop, when they picked it up, the stone that I had originally selected had a huge crack in the back. So it was a mad dash to find a new piece. I do think that this was successful. It wasn't my first choice, but again, when you're building a house, you have to be able to sort of roll with the punches, because we wanted to move in and this was going to hold it up. I went with the granite, a dark granite. I did do the perimeter in a silestone. And again, that keep that light all the way around. So the island can seat 6, and that was really important to us. We're a family, we have one son and he plays sports and we're kind of in and out. And so we wanted to be able to just have a place that we could eat as a family. This allows us just to kind of be together every night. We don't necessarily always go and sit in the dining room, but we do use this a lot. And then, we just designed the hood, the backsplash tile. I wanted something that had some golds in it. So what we did here is, I found this kind of back painted glass tile, which I thought was really interesting. It sort of has some of those motifs like the petrified wood or the, quartzite stone pieces that I love. And so I really liked that. It brought a little bit of darkness in from the cabinets. But then it also had sort of this lightness and reflective quality about it. And I'm also a big fan of mixing metals. I know sometimes people think like, oh, if you have, stainless and you should stick with stainless. And I sort of treat metals as colors. And I think that, they kind of work together as is. So, having stainless steel appliances, I still have brass finish on my hardware. These were from Anthropology. I find that I kind of look sometimes for untraditional sources for cabinet hardware because there's a lot of fun stuff out there that you can find. And then I also think like you should also still be able to display things on your countertops. It doesn't have to just all be kitchen related. I don't love countertop clutter, so I keep mine, kind of minimal. This actually, when we first shot the house for publication, the stylist brought in this huge black bowl. And, I mean, it's so big that if you were to fill it with fruit or something, you never even see the fruit. So I actually have always used it for our chips. So, kind of crazy, but this is true to how we live. We have our chips on the counter. Again, more artwork. This is also another Craig Allen that I have from Del Jus. And I have started slowly bringing in some live plants. I have always done flowers, but I've never really had a green thumb, but Trader Joe's has such great plants, and then if I kill them, I can replace them. But these guys have lived, so I'm really excited. So I do love having kind of that natural element in the kitchen as well. I also think that, you should have rugs in your kitchen, and so I have a really long runner that runs the length of the island because, again, it's nicer to stand on. And then we went back and forth. I know a lot of people do paneled refrigerators, and it just wasn't that important to me, especially because we like having our water in the refrigerator. So what was important is I did want the, French doors and the freezer drawer below. So, I just sort of built this cabinet, and, we let the appliances be what they are, like not necessarily hidden. So I think that, you can do that as well in your space. It's just whatever is going to function for you, and this really works for us. The lighting fixtures are actually Curry & Company. And again, I loved, having that. I wanted something that was big enough for the space and sort of felt like it anchored the island. I loved that this was sort of a 3-prong fixture. And then I just, I think it really works well with the space. It brings sort of the dark element in, but it has the brass accents that tie into to all the hardware. And then, of course, I think when you have kids, especially when they're younger, it's great to have a beverage center because they're always opening and closing the doors, for the juice boxes and such. So this, I tell everyone, I do love having that in the house. It's really nice. And again, I hang pretty mirrors. I mean, just because it's a kitchen and it's utilitarian doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't be a pretty space. So we use all these. Everybody has all this stuff, right? So these are all of our, hiding our wires and stuff for our charging. So again, just, nothing to say you can't put it in a pretty box and everybody can still get to it. So I'm just a big, fan of making things easy to use, but also like it looks nice as well. So, and then another little trick I think is especially like nice for kids is, of course, every kid comes home from school and walks in, takes off their shoes and drops their backpack, right? So I was like, well, here's a storage stool then. And that way my son can drop his stuff in the stool, which mostly means me putting it in the stool because we know as parents how that goes. And then yes, here we have, this is like our, just like where we keep our coffee maker and our microwave and stuff. But it's nice to be able to just close the doors when it's done being used in the morning. And just a lot of great storage. I chose, one thing that I did do here is, especially on the other side too, is I did a lot of doors because I just felt like it was nice and kind of a cleaner design and I could get more symmetry with that. But then we have a lot of these drawer pull-outs in the inside. So that's another thing to consider. Doing drawers sometimes can be a little bit more expensive than doors, but then you can always have your pull-out drawers behind them. So just something to consider when you're designing your kitchen. And then we just did really comfortable slip covered. So these were these are Lee Industry, and they're the Bobby McAlpine. They're a bar stool that he does. And I love it because this is a slip cover, so you can clean it. I think the big thing, especially one thing that I learned going from commercial architecture to residential, is a lot of the fabrics that we used in commercial spaces were really applicable in residential because you need them to be durable. I mean, especially as your children grow, you have kids who, we don't use napkins, right? So we just wipe our ketchup hand on the chair. So this is a faux leather, which is awesome because it's vinyl basically, and it's really cleanable. So we can just wipe it down, the ketchup comes off, you can take them off, you can clean. So another thing to consider is I think they're very attractive, design-wise, but they're very functional. So there's a lot of fabrics out there that you can, the technology in fabric has come so far. So there's a lot of great things that you can use that will also perform for you. And then I guess the only other thing that we didn't go into was the pantry. Everybody has the pantry, right? So ours, of course, is in a door behind. We have just a little light that comes on, and here's, I feel like I'm on Cribs and it's like, see what's in my refrigerator, but here's what's in my pantry. So this is just an alpha system, which is another great thing from the Container Store. And just pull out drawers and but there's nothing to say you can't put things in cute baskets. So when the door is open, if you have people that come over, you're like, well, at least it looks nice, right? So, and again, I even have a rug on the floor. So just another nod to, just because it's a utilitarian space doesn't mean it can't be pretty. I would say that my design style, I would say it's kind of eclectic. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. I love color, I love pattern, I love layers, and I love collecting objects. I kind of, anything from random wood pieces to stones to crystals to things from our travels. I just sort of love objects, and I feel like, this was a way that we were able to, when I was designing the house, I definitely made spaces to show these collections. So I think as you go through the tour, you'll be able to see that. I think for me, when I'm designing, especially for clients, it's all about them. And so for me to be able to really express my own personal taste, we use a lot of bold colors in the house. I am very inspired and influenced by ethnic prints and, fabrics and such from our travels. We went to Turkey and we were in Istanbul, and so I brought a lot of stuff back from there. And so just sort of having these really special pieces, and I always also tell my clients this, that it's really important to live with what you love, because then it's just joyful all the time. I think anything can sort of be a collection if it's important to you. So you will see a lot of colors. I sort of use my corridors, as I always say, like the cleansing palette, because they're just done in neutrals. I'm also a huge wallpaper junkie. So pretty much every room in the house has wallpaper in it, and I love that. So now, coming right off the kitchen, we'll take a look at the living room. The spaces are actually they feed into one another. That was really important to me. I know probably a lot of the viewers, it's, when you have people over, everybody congregates in the kitchen. And that was the one thing that I didn't really want when we were entertaining. So I felt like having this big space open to the kitchen was ideal, because it's easy for me to sort of, get people to then come into the space. So this is kind of a big open room. I always also, when I'm designing, I really look for how to maximize seating opportunities. So the space is really comfortable for when it's just my husband, son, and I, and our dog. But then it also, when we have people over, there's stools that we can pull up. There's extra seats. We host, we've done Super Bowl parties. My husband is a huge Georgia Bulldog. We've done, natty parties, and so we have all this where we, people can actually come and we can pull up. We basically will turn the bar stools around so people are, kind of in the space. And then we have all these seating opportunities. So at night, when we're just watching TV, we might sit on the swivel chair and put our feet up. But if we have people over, this is something that somebody can sit on too. So I think it's great that we can get so many people in this space, and it's comfortable. And that's the thing, when I'm entertaining, I want people to be able to sit and be comfortable. It also allows for different opportunities, having conversations, because there's different seating areas. So you can have a lot going on and all be together, which is really important to me. I also think the fabrics, this was another opportunity for me to really kind of introduce a lot of the kind of patterns and such that I love, with the Cuba cloth and, just more of the ethnic prints. These sofas actually have back cushions, but I just felt like this was a fun way to sort of make the sofa a little more personalized. I took those off and then I added the accent pillows that I wanted. So there's something that's kind of easy to do if you want to change up a look and you don't want to necessarily fully reupholster a sofa. You can sort of add some flavor by taking off the back cushions or even recovering just the back cushions. But in this case, we just added all the pillows. And then, of course, comfort is key for my boys. So, we have these swivel chairs and they can put their feet up, they can lay on the sofa, the TV. Like I said, big sports watcher, so that was, there was no space that we were going to get away with not having a big TV. And then I know a lot of people always ask designers, like, do you use ceiling fans? Well, I live in Georgia and I'm a realist and I want to stay married. So yes, I have a ceiling fan and I have a big TV. Check, check. Have to do that for my husband. So this was really important to design in the space. Because this is sort of floating in the middle, and this is actually our way to get downstairs through this door. But I didn't want to have just an open staircase down into the space. So what I went ahead and did was designed this sort of, again, keeping sort of the motif from the cabinets. You can see like the shapes. And we kind of came up with this whole design. It gave me an opportunity to do more display shelves for a lot of the stuff from our travels, just things that are interesting to me, a lot of the memories that we have, and then also functional. And it's also, for my son, it's always a fun thing when his friends come over and they haven't been here and he's walking into the wall and they think he's like, where is he going? So that's kind of fun. And then again, more display, just different things from different times in our lives. I mean, this is actually when I studied abroad when I was in college, and I got to go to Russia. And so that was a little painting that I picked up there. So, just having all these little moments. And then the last cabinet is actually our AV. So that's also a hidden kind of a hidden closet, and that we have the AV equipment. So, I think it turned out really well because it gives us a backdrop for the space, but it also, again, it has like sort of hidden functions. So right off the living room, we actually have a screened-in porch, and I love this space because we do have, in Atlanta, we have, the springtime and the fall that we get really nice days, and so we can just open up the doors and get that fresh air in and have, just a nice space. I go out there sometimes and have my cup of coffee. My mom used to live with us, and that was sort of like her place where she always, was out there reading her book. So it's just it's just like a nice little added sort of entertaining space. When we have people over, we can always open the doors up, and it's sort of spillover space. So I just wanted spaces in the house to be really flexible for just all of the activities that we're doing, and so that was really nice. And it's all outdoor fabrics, and just a place to sort of be fun with colors, and just a nice little kind of getaway. When designing the living room, and I think again for anyone who is looking to do a home, scale is really important. And so having someone, if you work with a professional who understands scale, because I think a lot of times people wouldn't realize how much furniture can actually fit in a space if it's scaled properly. So our sofas are standard size, they're large enough to lay on. Comfort is key. Also, I never recommend, furniture for looks. It's, you want to sit on it, it needs to be comfortable. We want this is supposed to support your life and make it enjoyable, not, make you miserable while you sit and watch your TV show. So I just think having small scale chairs that I have that are in front of the fireplace, again, it doesn't impede our vision of the fireplace when it's on. But, these are great because they're comfortable, they are like antiques, and it can, again, kind of tie you in. They're movable. We can move them around. We've put them over here before when we were watching games. But for us in our everyday life, they're perfect scale. They're easy to maneuver around. They're comfortable, but yet when we're sitting in, if we want to look at our fireplace, they're not impeding the view. So I think that's something to really consider too, is just when you're doing spaces, scale. I also think one thing in the space you'll see is there's a lot of lamps. I really love ambient lighting. We don't always have the overhead lights on, and it's just nice to have all these opportunities to have, if you're sitting on the sofa and reading, or we're just in the evenings, we have the overheads off and we're in the room. We have these lamps here on the console table. These were actually, I went to a source that had, they had a lot of antique drums from Indian block printing. And so I just thought these were really great, the texture, and then I had them made into lamps. So that was really fun. We actually used them in a show house, but I put them in the show house knowing that was an excuse for me to have them turned into lamps, and then they were coming home with me. So sometimes show houses are really good for that. You'll see my bed in the primary suite. That was from a show house, but I specifically designed it thinking it was coming home for me. So But yeah, just a lot of, again, I have a lot of texture, ceramics. I am the African jewelry, the currency, I'm a big fan of. You'll see a lot of that throughout the house. Even just, I love metal elements, these little faces. So I just say, if you love it, get it, and you can make it work in your space. So my design career path was a little different. I actually went to Vanderbilt University and was an economics major to start. I've always been creative from a young age. I've always loved design, but I sort of grew up in a very academic household, and my dad thought it was important to go get a business degree. And then I took stats for econ and said, there's no way that this is for me, and I became an art history major. So I knew that I was going to have to go back to school because there's not too much that you can do with an undergrad in art history. So I was talking to my mom, and she really encouraged me to, just look at doing interiors. And so I moved to Atlanta. I was living in New York, working in fashion right out of college. And then I moved to Atlanta because I had a lot of friends from school here, and started working, and then went back to the Art Institute at night. So my first job was with just a 2-person architecture firm, and that really helped me understand the purchasing and specification part of the job. We did a lot of model homes and with these condo conversions that were going on in Florida. So a lot of clubhouses and such. So that was really invaluable because when I then left there to go work for a big architecture firm, I went to a firm called Cooper Carry that was here in Atlanta, and they have offices throughout the country. I wanted to get the experience of working on really large projects as well. And that was commercial architecture, so it wasn't residential. And I spent about 8 years there. But what I learned at the first firm, the purchasing aspect, it isn't something that the big firms typically do. So when I decided to go out on my own, I was really happy to be able to sort of bridge those two careers together, because part of what I love about design is the furnishings aspect of it. I mean, we're a full service interior design firm. We just celebrated 14 years on July 1st, so that's very exciting. So we're here in our, going into our 15th year. And we do some commercial work still, not on the scale that Cooper Carry would do, but more of, we do all the work for Berry College. We do some law firm projects, a condo project that we're working on currently in Raleigh. And then we just do large scale residential. So everything, pretty much from the drawing part of the job all the way through completion, doing, everything from the furnishings, the art, the accessories. We sort of love all of that. So now I'm going to take you to see the primary bedroom. Follow me. So here we are in the primary bedroom. Definitely a bold statement. I think sometimes, depending on what I find sometimes with clients, and what I think is interesting is, I think that people who are morning people really like bright bedrooms, really white, clean, crisp. We're more of a nighttime family. I'm more of a night owl. I don't love early mornings. I have to do them, but I don't love them. So for me, I wanted a space where at the end of the day, it feels like I'm sort of wrapped up in the color. I went with sort of an aubergine wall covering that's from Weitzner. It's like a watermark. And when I found that, I just thought, oh, this is something at the end of the day I would love to just sort of come home to. It definitely has evolved over time. I've added sort of more artwork, again, a collection, things that are important to me, some interesting fabrics and patterns. I do a lot of layers and textures. So it is bold, but to me it is still very soothing. So this is the bed that I think I mentioned. We did a show house for Atlanta Homes and Lifestyles, and I was sort of tired of my bed, so I was like, well, if I'm doing the show house, I'm going to design something and then bring it home. And luckily I have a husband who's secure enough that he can sleep in a pink bed, but and have purple walls. That was the funny story. When we were building the house, the painters were asking him oh, the trim for your bedroom is purple, and he's like, I don't know. And so he called me and I said, well, it's aubergine. And he's like, is that purple? And I said, I mean, I guess, So that's how he found out that he was getting a purple bedroom. But yeah, I just really love layering the textures. I mean, this was another fabric that I found when we were on our trip to Istanbul in the bazaar. and I loved it. I loved the deep, rich purple and sort of the, bringing in some of those pink accents. And then the artwork has really been a collection over time. Some of it is just, funny things that I found at, antique places or kind of flea market finds. And some of it is a little bit, more collected. Like this again, I think I mentioned the artist Connie. This is another one of the pieces, and I sort of have, they're different pieces, but I think they coordinate on either side. But this is more the figurative work that I really like. That top piece is actually a little textile that I got when I was in Mexico City. And then this is an artist, that I sort of came across when I was at Round Top, and they had this was someone that used to do the lithographs for Liechtenstein, and this was his own work, and he sort of had a motif where he had like, that one over there actually has a gorilla in it, and that was sort of something that he continued in most of his little sketches. And yeah, so it's, the baskets again, I've collected those from different sources. I think the ones that are right over the bed are from Round Top. Again, I just really, I like to surround myself with things that speak to me and that feel important. And so this is sort of, it's a lot going on, but it sort of feels more of like my little museum in here. And it is very soothing, and it's nice to go to sleep surrounded by things that I love. I do think when we talk about the motif from the kitchen cabinet design, I found this piece. This is a Bernhardt piece, but it had that same motif. So I think like that is something that I tried to do throughout spaces, is that there's sort of a vocabulary. So if there's a shape or something, like we might repeat it in other rooms. It doesn't have to be literal, but this one actually was pretty spot on, but I thought that that was nice to then have a little bit of that motif in the bedroom. Again, I love the crystals. Most of this is like amethyst, which was my mom's birthstone. So I have sort of a collection of that, and family photos, and I do love fresh flowers and candles and all that stuff. These are little stools that I had designed because, again, like to have flexible places to sit. You can put your feet up if we want to, pull them over, but also just to sit to put your shoes on. And then this is also artwork from Connie. This is some more examples of the painting that's done on the silk fabric. And again, like, the colors just worked really well in here, but just having like the bleeding of the purple and a little bit of the fuchsia pink, I thought really worked nice and tied in to the space. So again, it's always really important to have good table lamps. Again, I don't always love having the overhead lights on, so to have sort of that ambient lighting. And I thought these were really interesting. These are arterials, and just like the texture, I think that's kind of consistent, and a lot of what I collect is, interesting textures. And you can never go wrong with blackout drapes. So I am enough, like when we close them at night, when I talk about being a cocoon, I mean, they also block out any light that seeps in. So you really do, it's a great space to sleep. It really sort of envelops you after, a long day of doing design work. So when you're designing spaces, I think you should always keep what is important to you. For my family, they really like having carpet in bedrooms. They don't necessarily want hardwood. So what we did is, we did wall-to-wall carpeting, but I also add accent rugs because you can always layer a rug on top. So that's a great way to sort of bring in, some additional colors or patterns. And we just have one sort of sitting at the foot of the bed with chairs. But I think that's a way that, it was important for my husband and son to have carpet in the bedroom, but this is a way that we can still incorporate the rugs that I love. So these chairs I found at, just an old kind of flea market place. Again, I think they were in the same like pea green velvet that my dining room chairs were in. But I just thought they were a great scale. Again, like scale is super important. So they were a great scale for the bedroom because they're low, but they're comfortable. They're from, I think, the 60s as well. So really well made, hand-tied frames and such. But, I wanted to make them interesting. So here's just sort of a glimpse of some of the times the things that I do is that there's nothing wrong with doing different fabrics on cushions. Just, the chair, I do have the chair. Originally, it was done in all of this, sort of mauve velvet. And then when I decided I needed to change, then I went ahead and just redid the cushion. So the seat cushion and the back cushion, and kind of more fun fabrics and kind of put those together. So it's just a great way to add some interest to a piece. Again, you don't have to fully reupholster the entire piece, but it can give you a new, fresh look, with more of a minimal investment. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at our primary bath. Here we are in the primary bathroom. Here's another example of me and my love of wall covering. As I said, I sort of have it throughout the house. This is actually, I do use a lot of vinyl wall covering. The living room is in vinyl. The primary is in vinyl, and this bathroom is in vinyl. That's something that, coming from commercial architecture, it's like scrubbable, it's durable, and again, like when we were building the house, I have a child, I have a dog, and I just want it to look pretty, but I also want it to be able to be cleaned. So that was something that I chose to do in here. And this was just sort of, we went kind of with the gray palette. We did a porcelain look on the floor, and I wanted just something more timeless, but I did kind of pop in a different, not going all gray, a lighter tile and a herringbone pattern. So it adds some interest. I found these knobs at Anthropology. Again, just kind of little bits of jewelry to dress up, kind of a typical gray vanity. This is the same material I used actually in the kitchen. This is a silestone product, so it's a quartz, man-made, very durable. And I think here is another example of how I really mix metals. I went with a polished nickel for my faucets because I was like, well, am I one day going to be tired of gold? It hasn't happened yet, but I think the polished nickel is really nice because it sort of bridges that gap between silver and gold. It's a silver finish, but it has a warmth to it that a gold would have. So we went with that, and it's shiny and sparkly and I think pretty in a primary bath. Even the light fixtures here, they have sort of the dark mirrored, more silver look with the gold. The mirrors that are from Philip Scott. We had these Philip Scott, this is one of their designs, but you can custom paint them. So I did them in the gray finish, adding with the Greek key, the gold. So, just kind of adding a lot of the little sparkle that I think is kind of fun, but utilitarian. I mean, I have, these canisters just sit out here all the time, and they've got our Q-tips and our little cotton swabs, and we just sort of, I have my little area for my vanity that has my makeup brushes, but I think it's, it's just nice to put things in pretty containers, because then when they're out on the countertop, it's, they're still nice to look at. So it doesn't have to be necessarily too utilitarian. So of course, having a big shower is important. We went with, at the time when we were designing the house, the latest and greatest was the large format porcelain sheets. And so I looked at doing those. It was still a little cost prohibitive at the time because it was sort of a new material and not a lot of the installers were that familiar with it. So I went with the 30 by 30, which was still a nice large format. So that was something sort of new at the time. So we just I loved this because it looked like onyx. And it brought kind of the cooler grays, but it had the warmth of the gold. So that is, kind of what we did in the shower. And again, went with the polished nickel for the fixtures because I sort of, like I said, it bridges that gap between the silver and the gold. And of course, no primary bath is complete without a really nice deep soaking tub. This was kind of a perfect size. It fits in the window. Especially after a long day, it's just nice to be able to come in and soak. I don't typically do the jetted tubs. I just am fine with just, the soaking tub. So this is a nice one from MTI, and just a very clean design, and, not too contemporary, not too traditional. So I thought that worked well in the space. When you're in the soaking tub, you do want to have like a little table next to it, so you can either put a drink or your shampoo or other things. Of course, I have all my bath bombs and little things to add to the bathtub. So, but this I actually found at Target. It was in their garden section, but I loved it because it was gold, and of course it's waterproof, which you do want something so garden stools are great to look for, because if they get splashed, it's not like having wood that could, damage over time. So that's my little, there's really good design at Target too. So that's my little steal from there. I think when you're building a home from the ground up, I mean, it is really important to have professionals engaged if that's something that, you can afford to do. There's just a lot of decisions that I think what happens a lot when we're working with homeowners is it's almost like decision fatigue, and they become so overwhelmed that, they hastily sometimes make decisions because they're just tired of actually having to, direct the design. So I do think, it is important to engage professionals when you can. I also think that sometimes, it's really important when you're looking at your architectural finishes and like those more permanent things to be thoughtful about those decisions. I've had clients and, they just get sort of to the end, and I mean, one was, the round sink, the oval sink was, $25 less than the rectangular one. But then, then she hates the round sink now, but that means you're taking out all the countertops and, possibly damaging the cabinets and stuff. So little things like that are really like permanent design things. Just be sort of, cognizant that like, if you really want something, try to make it work. I mean, obviously, none of us have unlimited funds, so you need to sort of prioritize, but be true to what's important to you, and don't get talked into things as well. Sometimes like contractors and such will try to be like, oh, just get this, it's less, and it could be that they're getting a higher margin on it. I'm not sure why, sometimes they make the recommendations that they do, but you also have to be ready. I mean, it's a very tedious process to go to. Even being in the business and knowing what I know, we still had crazy things happen. Like they poured all of our concrete foundation walls 5 feet into our front yard setback. And we even had said something to the builder like, I don't think this is right. This looks a little close to the street. And they were like, oh no, they've checked it. And so even things like that, if you in your gut think something's not right, speak up, but just get ready, because no matter how much you know about the business, there's always going to be mistakes and things that like you can't foresee or even correct or do yourself, because you're not technically building the house. Favorite piece of the home are the people in it, my son, husband, dog, my in-laws, but I also think like all the memories. A lot of the stuff that I have sitting on the shelves are going to be, like a little tiki guy that we got when we were in Hawaii, or a mask that we got when we were in Costa Rica. So I think it's all those, just snapshots from our lives and our, just our time together that are really special to me. So here we are in my guest bedroom. This actually is the newest design space of the house. My mom lived with us for about 6 years, and the room looked completely different. It was blue. We did still have this bed, but it was much more traditional, I guess. Like the end tables and the bookcase and everything were a little bit more like traditional. So when she moved out, I decided to change it up. So the starting off point was I saw this great wall covering from Tebow, and I loved it. I love kind of the bold graphics, and I love the colors. I think they sort of flow with sort of some of the other spaces in the home. I did keep the bed, but I think it has a totally different look now that it's in a room with this bold, geometric, more modern paper. These are actually Ballard. We did, I liked sort of the rattan front and the warm wood. So I think this was, bringing in these copper tones and having the black iron bed and sort of how to pull all that together. I loved these Revelation lights. This is travertine. And then of course with the gold shade, I thought it spoke to the gold like design on the wallpaper. And then again, just things that I found, great little pottery pieces from different places. Great, we can put flowers in them when we have guests, and there's a little dish that's a stone dish somebody can put their rings or jewelry in when they're visiting. So, just having those sort of opportunities. And another little spot to put an art piece. These were some, paintings that I found. An artist, she said they were her test. She just did these little like test of the colors and how they were going together, but I really liked them, so I asked her if I could buy those from her. So that's what those pieces are, and just having them framed. And this is a Del Jus piece. It's actually encaustic, but I thought it really tied in all of the colors of the room and was bold. So my art does tend to be very modern. I have a piece here that is a Connie piece, so the same artist that I've pointed out throughout the house. This piece is on plexi though, so a different medium for the artist, but I love the colors, and it does have a little bit of that plum that's more from my bedroom in it. When I decided to do the linens, I had gotten this pillow cover when I was in Mexico City on my trip, and I really liked it. I liked the handmade quality, the stitching, and I just thought that the colors, it was a great way to tie in sort of, you know, the dark from the bed and the copper tones of the wall covering, and just thought it really worked nice. It even has a little bit more of that taupey gray, which the wall covering has. So it was, you know, again, I bought this. I hadn't necessarily picked out the wall covering yet, but I felt like it just, you know, came together because there were pieces that I loved, and so they work well together. Another piece that I love is this chest that I got at Round Top. I actually had a stone top put on it just for durability purposes, and it is an antique, so it's really old, but it's all hand carved. And there's some damage on it, but I think, you know, it adds kind of to the patina of the piece, but I just loved the scene. And, you know, I think it just goes to show, I mean, this isn't necessarily for everyone, but I love the juxtaposition of this sort of Asian-inspired, you know, motif against this very modern graphic wall covering. And I just think that they work really well together. Eventually, I will have a little chair in the corner, but that's still being worked on at the upholsterer. It took me a while to figure out what fabric that I wanted to put on that. And then a giant TV that my husband put up. So, you know, our guests will always be able to relax in their own room and don't have to sit in the main room and watch TV with us. So another thing, you know, when I found this wall covering, it does have more of a light background, so I wanted the trim in the room to really pop. So I did go ahead and paint all of the trim dark. It's a warm black caviar from Sherwin-Williams, and I thought that was a nice way to sort of offset the light background of the wall covering. So this is my mudroom. And again, as you've seen throughout the rest of the house, I just am a fan of, you know, putting collections up wherever you can find space. So I know people, sometimes they come in and they laugh that this is like my mudroom, but I think every space could be designed. So these are all crazy little wood elements that I've found over the years. I mean, these are old hat molds. Of course, we have like an antique level. These are all old printing presses. There's a glass mold. We have the weaving bobbins, of course, a nod to the compass. And then all these, I love sort of the way that these things looked, because these were used in printing. So you have this metal element on the wood blocks. And I just think over time, the patina is really interesting. So again, just sort of, you know, put them up on a wall together and they become almost like an art installation. You have to have storage. So these are just from Ballard's. This is sort of like a running line that they had. So we have, you know, pool stuff, old towels, football gear, all of this in the hidden storage. And, you know, just adding a little bench, someplace that we can put a bag on when we come in or sit down on to put shoes on. And then art. I mean, I still love to put art everywhere that I have wall space. So I do little collections in the halls and the mudroom. You know, these were came out of a book, and they were instruments, and I thought they were really, you know, kind of loved the colors, the richness of them. They were also, we used them first in a show house in a bathroom, and then I thought they worked really great here. My dad had bought some paintings from some artist that was having a sale where I grew up in Florida, and this was one of them. And, you know, again, still really love it. I don't know the artist personally, and it's something from the 70s, but just the colors and everything feel really like they work in my house. We did do a tile floor in the mudroom. Obviously, this is like you're coming in off the garage, you're coming in from the outside. So we did a really durable porcelain tile floor. But what I loved about that floor, the tile, it actually kind of reminded me a lot of the petrified wood elements that I have in the home. And so you'll see that here, you can wipe it down. And we did a hide rug. This is something that I had for a long time. And I just think, what's great about hide is it's very durable and cleanable as well. I mean, it's an animal skin, so, we can wash it, vacuum it. So again, it's like a very utilitarian, usable space. We have a tray for the football cleats and all the stuff when we want to come in and dump it off. And then, even little hooks just to hang our keys. So, and then just to be silly, we actually put old keys over the keys. So, just in case you weren't sure where to put your keys, then this was a nod to the keys. But yeah, I just really like to kind of mix everything, put drapery in the mudroom. I mean, I close these every night just to give us privacy, but I love the softness and the little feminine detail. So I think the space was really successful, even though it's like a little small nook. So what makes a house a home, obviously, is definitely those people that are in it, your friends that come visit. I love beautiful things as a designer, but I also want, especially when I'm working for my clients and even ourselves, it needs to function. It needs to function. It's supporting the life that you're creating. So it's supposed to be the backdrop to those memories. And so, it's important to know what fabrics to use and stuff if you have young kids and pets and all those things, but it should always just be a place that you feel comfortable and happy and supporting like the wonderful memories that you're making with your family and your friends.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.